The conscious conversations you crave. Sex, love, wholeness, the truth of life. Cosmicsmith Radio with Rhonda Smith. For some, the path requires a deep walk through the fires of hell to find the truth and fierceness to live one's purpose. In this episode, we sit down with Jason MacKenzie. His incredible journey has led him to remember that he is a feeling warrior. The loss of his first wife to suicide led him on a path to find healing so that he could support others in finding their own. Here is your cosmic disclaimer. Please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any ailment or health condition. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please keep in mind that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dance your way on over to iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and hit subscribe so you can stay connected and receive all of our future episodes. Join the movement at Cosmicsmith.com to ensure weekly delivery of life-changing and thought-provoking conversations. Don't forget to join the conversation over on the Cosmic Smith Facebook page. Now let's get down to some conscious conversation. Jason MacKenzie, welcome to this episode of Cosmic Smith Radio. Thank you so much for being a guest.
I'm so excited. This is probably the conversation I've been the most excited to have in quite a while. So I'm really happy to be here.
I saw you on someone else's podcast on social media. We have a lot of the same connections and friends, and I loved the work that you're doing, and I loved your story so much. And I knew that this conversation was going to be epic. And in our pre-call, I think we could have probably talked on the phone for hours, just sharing and sharing our knowledge. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came into the work that you do today?
Yeah, for sure. So I was, I guess the Coles Notes version is my first wife and the biological mother of our children was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And it was a very difficult time. I mean, it was 5 years of really, it was quite hellish. I mean, she was a police officer. She went from really deteriorated, just almost nonstop over those 5 years to, we're talking like, we were near bankruptcy, homeless shelters, rehab, institutionalization, electroshock therapy, all kinds of medication, psychiatrists, like a very common path, I think, for people that are diagnosed with bipolar disorder or misdiagnosed perhaps is a better way to put it with the bipolar disorder. And so and then in 2010, her emotional dysregulation, had caused so much catastrophe and chaos and damage that she really had nothing left at that point, and she decided to take her own life. And what happened with me was, I think it was a combination of a whole bunch of different factors. I think one of them was feeling this need to really conform to this, traditional male stereotype, almost a caricature of what a man is supposed to be. And so I didn't allow myself to experience that time in probably a way that was as healthy. I mean, it was incredibly challenging and nothing would have changed that. But what was really important to me at the time was just maintaining a facade of having my shit together. And because that's what an alpha male does. And so even my life was completely falling apart, and I was falling apart too, but man, I was holding on to this facade. It was like a Potemkin village, I guess, like a death grip. And it really damaged me, and it's taken me almost up until right now, and I'm still uncovering it to understand just how traumatic it was. And in lieu of talking about my feelings or even admitting I had them, I turned to alcohol and drugs too, mostly alcohol, but a fair amount of drugs too, I would say. And believing that, not understanding at all what grief was. So after she died, not even comprehending at any kind of level that grief was a process I needed to go through, not understanding why I was continuing drinking, and then finally stopping and it taking my 9-year-old daughter looking me in the face and telling me she was disappointed in me to realize, yeah, okay, I gotta, this is it. I'm done. And then, the journey forward from that has been really interesting because even in our conversation, I learned something new about it. And I guess it's taken me a long scenic journey to get back to the idea of making a difference in this sphere of emotional. I don't really consider it like, I don't want, it's not mental health as much to me as it's emotional and mental well-being, and it's human connection. But it took me a long scenic route to get back to that point where I started, just with a different perspective. So now there's just so much I want to be a part of changing.
Well, in the indigenous culture, they believe that these things are given to us as the doorway to become what we're supposed to become, and a healer, right? So I feel like sometimes the deeper levels of trauma that people go through allow us to hold a different level of space for people. And I know the space you do in your coaching and the space you do in your podcast allows men specifically, and I'm sure women too, to really open up in a deeper way and show them that, you don't have to spiritually bypass your way into pretending to be this like external thing, because when our insides don't match our outside world, there's massive conflicts that happens in the body, physically, mentally, spiritually. And accepting our truth and walking in it as we are. I mean, I remember the first time I was like, okay, I was a meth addict and I was these things, and I have tried to kill myself and to be in those spaces. When I finally accepted that and I could actually vocalize it to people without like this incredible level of shame, like that is when my transformation really, really started rapidly happening. So going back to your wife a little bit, I imagine that time for you was just incredible hell, and I have so much compassion and I see you for all that you have been through. But at the same time, I can also see like the results of how this experience has helped you. So do you try and find the gifts in it?
Oh, and this is, I think this is the most important message I think that has come from this, is that everything that happens to us contributes to the person we are right now. And I think we have a great power to decide how we choose to interpret it and then what we do with it. So there was a time when, if you had asked me that question, I would have said that period of my life was hell and I'm glad it's over. And now I look at it like, well, obviously there's a person who's dead, so there's a tragic element to it. It was a absolutely crucible experience in helping me become the person I am today. So I see, it's hard to say I wouldn't change it, because, but I can't control the life and death of somebody else. So I think in some ways I wouldn't change it, because it's just made me a more powerful, compassionate, and driven person to make a difference. And I'm just a way better person as a result of having gone through this than I would have been otherwise, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so fascinating because I'm so intrigued by men who are feeling men and that are allowed to feel and that hold space for other people to feel, because it's not really how it's been created for you guys, like to be strong and to man up and to not cry and all of these things. And in reality, we're just trapping the trauma and making ourselves sick. So the work that you do, let's talk a little bit about that. You have an incredible group and you support men that suffer with mental health. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because what ended up happening was I do a fair amount of talking to audiences about mental health, and I tell my story and that kind of stuff. And I was getting really tired of it. And I was thinking why I was getting tired of it was I'm basically sick of talking about the past. I felt like this obligation to talk about it because it seemed to help people, but I was getting tired about it. But I realized just this year that, it's not that I'm getting tired about it. It's tired of talking about it. It's that I'm getting tired of only talking about it. So I thought, man, what can I do? So, and I'm a big proponent of vulnerability, especially for men, as the source of power, of courage, strength, and wisdom. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll create a safe place for guys who are either dealing with mental health issues or supporting a loved one dealing with mental health issues. And so I started a group called the Mental Health Warriors. And that's what it is. It's a community founded on 5 guiding principles: community, confidentiality, safety, accountability, and excellence. And yeah, it's growing. There's probably about 175 guys in there right now. It's growing every day. And what I think what's really the most important thing for me is not only creating a safe place for guys and watching the mask come off when they join the group and they realize it's safe. That's really important. But what's really important to me are the last 2 guiding principles, which are accountability and excellence, because there are a million things you can do to live the life that you are meant to live, regardless if you are dealing with a mental health issue or not. And I think sometimes, let's put it this way, it's become really clear to me that while there are legitimate, mental illness, there's a lot of other opportunity for people to live a different life for themselves. And that means stepping up. That means finding a purpose. That means having a dragon to slay if you're a guy, or a beauty to rescue, and that kind of stuff. So I've done that. And then I've done the Mental Health Warriors podcast, which we just tried to record an episode of, and we'll get back to.
We will get back to it.
But, my goal there is to really assemble the most diverse set of perspectives on mental health, emotional and mental well-being and health anywhere. Because I know that when we were going through our journey with doctors and psychiatrists and all that, it never even crossed my mind that there might be an alternative to just somebody being loaded up with medication. And when that doesn't work, being institutionalized. And when that's not working, getting electroshock therapy. Like, I just had no idea. I just thought that they didn't, as little as they seemed to know about what was happening, they knew more than anybody else. And I look back now, I look at what I've learned in really mostly this year, and it just blows my mind about the range of options that are available to people if they're willing to open their minds to them.
Yeah, there's all this research, and I'm not saying that this is fact for anybody out there who wants to question this. It's something to consider. But we're learning so much about how like the gut health is really the mental health help, and like understanding the gut flora and understanding like, magnesium and these things that are key elements of us having good, strong health and nutrition and diet and all of these things. But helping somebody who feels so deeply feel those feelings rather than try and escape them, which is what I experienced when I was going through depression, and is I would resist it so desperately rather than just fall into it. And you said something a few minutes ago about being vulnerability is such a key part of this. I've noticed in the coaching that I do that men have a more challenging time usually of being witnessed going through something. So what was it like to be in that vulnerable state with your daughters?
It was pretty terrible, actually, at the time. Now, at that point, probably my 9-year-old daughter gave me the greatest gift I think anyone's ever given, which is her having the courage to be honest with me, finally gave me the courage to be honest with myself. And what happened was, as I healed, as I stopped drinking and I gave myself some time and space, and I started to kind of grieve, 5 years later, actually, I started to go through grieving my first wife's death. And I was remarried at this time. And I remember thinking, I don't know what's happening to me right now, because I never let myself feel emotions. I thought my, steady Eddiness was a strength. And so I'm feeling these emotions, and I'm saying to my wife now, I don't know what the hell is happening to me. And she goes, "You're fucking grieving, dummy." That's, basically what she said. And I never put a word to it. Like that thought never crossed my mind. And as I went through that, I started to accept and come to terms with not only what happened to my wife, but my behavior during that time. And so I had made some pretty gigantic mistakes. And I thought, man, I feel like, because I'm more at peace with it now. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not, I don't feel like I want to continue to give this heroic, sanitized version of what happened. And so I thought, okay, so I went up on stage a couple of years ago, and I was in front of like 300 cops because my first wife was a cop. And I just admitted, I was unfaithful to her while she was in the locked ward of a psychiatric institution. I said horrible things to her. I made lots of mistakes. I did lots of things I was proud of, but man, 6 years is a long time of being at the end of pushed beyond your limits. You're going to make some huge mistakes. And so I thought, I'm just going to say this, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm okay with it. And what happened afterwards was unbelievable. And I mean, now with what I know now, totally unsurprising, but I just created my vulnerability and my willingness. Like, I define vulnerability, it's kind of changes over the years, but I really kind of see it now as, being willing to share your story in the service of other people. It's not barfing your innermost thoughts all over everybody's face that you come across. That's like self-absorption. It's, I have something to share, and I'm willing to share it in the service of other people. So, and people came up to me after that, and they were in tears, because they told me their stories. And I bet you for some of those people, it was one of the very few times I felt comfortable, because they knew I wasn't going to judge them. God, look what I had just stood on stage and admitted. And that was the first moment where I realized that this is powerful. And then I started, it's funny. I wonder why nobody ever really told me this. How is this possible? Like this, just being myself and is the only version anybody ever wanted. It's a pretty weird thing to wrap your head around at like 41.
Yeah. So I was 38. So completely the same thing. I went on stage in front of 300 people and shared, my deepest, darkest night of suicide and meth. And a woman came up to me afterward and she was like, I just had this experience a few days ago with drugs, and she had a past addiction. And it was like allowing the exhale, like finally to exhale, like this is who I am and see me for who I am. And what an amazing, incredible, challenging experience that you've been through. And the vulnerability of accepting that we don't get to always be perfect and we don't always have good actions. And, it's really the world that we live in. And it's a little bit of what I have an issue with kind of with the new age stuff that's happening still, is that it's this spiritual bypass, like just be positive, just be awesome, just be whatever. Well, I have a really good friend and he has a really hard time with me sitting in my feelings. Like he doesn't want to talk to me. It makes him uncomfortable. And I understand that. And I used to think that was my fault, but it's not I don't want to call it issue. It's not my thing to resolve. It's his. I'm a feeling person. I have days where I don't feel well, and I don't publicly say like, I feel like shit today, but I'll do it in a way that's the storyteller and express like what I'm going through. So people understand, like not every day has sunshine and roses. There are days that are deep in feeling for me and have anxiety and I have fear and I have all of these things, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think as you become more, say, quote, public, it's interesting what people take away from the image you present, So I earlier this year, I had asked some people, what do you think, what would you like to learn from me? What could I help you with? And the number one thing people said to me was, how are you so positive all the time? And I'm like, I'm not positive all the time. And I think that generally I'm a pretty optimistic person. So in a couple of days later, I was like having a major anxiety attack. And I made a video of it and I put it online and I said, this is where I'm at right now. And I don't really feel like I want to change it. It fucking sucks. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not enjoying this moment, but but this is a part of the human condition, or it's a part of my journey. And where I used to be not even willing to acknowledge that I would feel those things. And then I went through this phase where it's like, I want to be the witness and all this stuff, and which I'm sure has some value. But then there's times where I'm like, you know what? I just want to let this overwhelm me and just like fully experience what this is like, because I don't understand it. I really don't. I've been learning about my emotions for like 3 years, and it's like, it's a lifetime journey. I get that now. So I think it's really important to be able to be okay with being where you're at. Like a couple of weeks ago, this wasn't like a major issue, but a couple of weeks ago, I basically did not get out of bed, and I ate this gigantic Costco-sized bag. That Chicago popcorn where they got the crumb on that? Like it was like there was crumbs all over, and I'm like, what's happening to me? But that happens to me about once a month. It's my own kind of like, it's my own cycle.
It's
right?
a cycle. I was just going to say that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then I get up and like go, wow, that was pretty intense. And then I get on with getting on, and I don't run from that anymore.
Mm-mm. No, and I call it sitting in your shit. But like there are days and it's like, rather than to try and, okay, what can I do to pattern break myself out of this or use an LP? And I'm like, no, I just need to go like lay in bed and feel this. What's this here to teach me? And, what's I find really interesting is, you waiting for your grieving process and having someone to be able to hold space for you, your new wife, and have her say, you're grieving, but to have you experience on some minute level deep feelings as your first wife had experienced. Yeah. Because a lot of times when we don't have perspective on something, it's really hard for us to be relatable. So, having it like almost like break you into being feeling and allowing what was deep within you.
That's a great point. I never really thought about that, but yeah. And maybe that actually, just thinking out loud here, but maybe that is actually part of the healing process, is being able to empathize with what she was going through and maybe in some small way understand it. I think what's really interesting, something I've learned is while suicide is final, but like the truth is subjective. And those things are really weird to try to reconcile sometimes. So like an example that I've just really realized recently is because I started telling these stories about about like the mistakes I had made when my wife Cindy was sick. I really, and that seemed to connect with people. I thought, my thought process was, I'm going to tell, like, I wanted to make sure that people know, like, the more people know this, the better, or whatever. And so, but what I was starting to do was really only tell those stories. Right. Mm-hmm. And I started to think, God, you were kind of a real dick back then, and then I went through earlier this year, and I had written over this time, probably about 150 pages of journals and stuff. And I went through and I read it, and I was like, wow, no, you weren't. You were not a dick. You made some mistakes, but man, you did a lot of stuff that you were really, really, you stood tall in some really difficult times a lot. And it just really it was a poignant reminder of how powerful our language is in shaping the reality that we see. And that's, I think, part of the journey, suicide being final. Like, another thing is, for example, when Cindy died, I told myself, and I told other people, that I believe that why she took her own life is because the last gift she had to give us was our freedom, right? From chaos. And then it's just this year, I'm like, I don't know if that's what was going, how would I know if that's what was going through her head? I mean, it's plausible that it was going through her head, but I have no fucking idea if that's actually what was going through her head. And just to be able to be okay with that I'll never actually know the answer to that question, was an interesting thing to come to terms with.
I can only imagine. So being a person I slit my wrist, and in the moment that was leading up into that point, like the moments, the hours, everyone's like, why didn't you call me? Or like, how selfish, like that's a big part. And I want to break that stigma, because it's actually one of the most selfless acts. And that is going to be a controversial statement when a person finally kills themselves, because it's like the burden of being taken care of, the burden of like the chaos that we've created. And then obviously the story that's going on in the mind. But what I experienced the moment that I slit my wrist is like everything changed, and all I wanted to do was live. And it was like, but I was given the gift of being able to save that time. And it was really interesting how the whole thing worked. And then I was in this mentality, like, I will never be that deep again. I've experienced it. I understand what it's like to be in suicidal thoughts and then to break through and go to the other side and not die. And then I did it again, but I did it again differently. I took a bunch of pills. And at that point, I didn't care. Like, when I took the pills, I didn't care. And in my thought process, I wasn't thinking about anyone. I wasn't thinking about, and that was just me, but I wasn't thinking about how it would bring relief to anybody. I wasn't thinking about how it wouldn't be chaos or drama. I was just completely just enraptured in my pain and didn't care. And the second time I took the pills and I didn't care. And then I ended up telling my boyfriend, which he made me drink peroxide, and I threw everything up, which is a very interesting process and well. And at that point, like, I didn't care if I lived, even like, I was like, whatever happens, happens at this point. And it's like this endless thing, but it really understanding the trigger and what triggers people. So for me, and obviously there's many different clinical types of people having suicidal thoughts. And again, I'm not a therapist, or I've been trained, and it's just been my own experience. But for me, I always had a trigger. Every single time there's a suicidal moment in my life, even till to this day, I have one trigger that triggers it, and it's love, or me not feeling loved the way I want to feel loved, or whatever. And like, so for me, that was perpetually always where my brain was wired to go. I feel this way, boom, I'm going to go to that thinking, and what will it be like? And will they be sad without me? And, this really victim mentality. And now I'm just like, okay, so what's really happening in my life? Okay, so I'm feeling these things, and it's because I'm not feeling this. Okay. And then you peel back the layers, and then it kind of dissipates for me. So it's interesting not know. You don't get to know, and that's part of the journey too. But I imagine you'll have different awareness and epiphanies as this time goes on, as to what she may be thinking. And I don't know if you're able to connect with her, if you have that belief or ability, but like to understand the process of like kind of what the soul does. Some people believe like you get trapped in between dimensions. Like I've heard shamans talk about this. You get trapped in between dimensions and you have to do your work to get out, and all of this stuff. It's like, whatever it may be, it's a really hard end for many, many people. And it's a really sad way to not be able to. And it's like, we have to start having these conversations about medicating somebody so they don't feel it isn't helping. I'm not saying it's not an option, and I'm not saying it doesn't help, but for some people it isn't helping to release what needs to be released.
There's been a few times where I have truly felt her presence. And the one time that stands out the most was in the summer a few years ago when I was meditating. And I would say, even though you're not supposed to put judgments around meditation, I kind of suck at it from time to time. So it's a journey, but no, it's a journey. And but anyways, in this one particular moment, I felt her presence. Now, what's interesting about that is, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. And it doesn't really matter to me. It just means that whatever it was about that time, and the sun was shining, and I was focusing on a point of light, and, making the point of light bigger. It was a guided meditation. I physically felt something, and I don't know what it was. But it was, I don't think it matters. It just was me connecting with her in a way that meant something to me. And I don't think it needs to be anything more than that. And there's been other, like, for example, there's been times when I've gone to her grave where I have just bawled, just sobbed there. And then there's been other times I've gone to her grave, so for example, maybe even the very next time after, just such an emotional visit, the very next time I'm like, I feel like I'm talking to a rock. Right. And you never know. You never know what it's going to be like. And I think it's really important just to understand that you will never know, and there is no right or wrong, and to just release yourself from judgment and understand that this is what it's going to be like. And if you allow yourself to be there, so for me to say why, I feel like I'm talking to a rock, it gave me the opportunity to just think about that. And, why was something different one time versus the next? I mean, if we throw all this judgment in, it just really clouds your ability to learn the lessons, whatever, if there are any to be learned,
Well, it's all fluid. Like, if it's the same every time, aren't we creating that same situation for ourselves in the grieving process every time? I know when my mom died, it was tragically difficult for me to go through. In the first year, I had her up on this pedestal, only spoke of the most positive things about her, and just such deep sadness. And I was so angry at her the second year, a complete full year of just total anger and why couldn't you have done these things? And looking at everything, and it's so fluid, because there's times that it still pops up, and now I have different beliefs around even what I felt within the anger, and we grow when we have more experience to have these things. So we'd want it to be more organic than what we're shown on TV or in the movies, where you go to the grave each Sunday and you take flowers and you do whatever, right? Each time, and it's the same, and their sadness or whatever. It's no, it's living. It's a living relationship with ourselves and still the energy of this person and the memories that we have with them.
You're right. And I think what's important is that as I continue to change, the way I look back on that time will naturally change, because it contributed, so I'll use drinking as an example. So when I first stopped drinking, I still in some way didn't think it was that big a deal, because I knew it was a big deal, but the thing is, my life hadn't changed that much other than I stopped drinking. Everything else was kind of the same, and then as I started to get into understand personal growth and started to, be more open. And then my trajectory is changing, right? So it's as time passes, there's a bigger gap between where I would have been versus where I am now. And so then I start to look back and I'm like, wow, drinking was pretty bad. And now I look at myself over 3 years later, and I'm like, it was a catastrophe, because I never would have been able to realize any of the things or create any of the things that I've created. So, I look back on it in the same series of events, but in a much different way, because I see I'm able to more clearly see how limiting they were.
Well, and it's very much the same, me being a meth addict or a junkie, or however I want to put it, and all the things I did, or a person that's tried to kill themselves, what that's done for me is I don't have to live in that story anymore. That's not who I am today. And I had a really hard time breaking pattern, especially in typical recovery. You're constantly telling yourself for the rest of your life that you're a recovering addict or a recovering alcoholic or recovering something. And I feel like I don't want to be that person. I'm not that person anymore. And the space that I'm able to hold for people now, because I've experienced the shadow of it. Like, I can sit with anyone and listen to anyone's pain or story or anything, and not have judgment and not need to fix it and not need to spin them out of it. And I'm sure it's very much the same with your work, but that level of depth that we have gained is so deep, and it makes it so much different for the people that we do support. Clearly, why you have your show and I have mine.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the holding space thing is so important, because I didn't have my own answers for the longest time. And there's a lot of times now I don't have my own answers. Right. And so accepting that, the answers maybe that I don't have right now, maybe I will have them at some point in the future. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll take a path where I don't even need to have those answers. I don't know. It's all very fluid. And I as you say, so when I talk to people now, I don't feel any need to try to give them the answers. It's just like, I'm here, and let's just be in this moment and let yourself, like I was talking to somebody the other day, and he has a really challenging relationship with his ex-wife who's got some pretty severe mental health challenges. And so what he does is he has this belief, or had this belief, that, I should be, quote, man enough, because I know she's mentally ill, that when she turns her rage against me, that should be like water off a duck's back. And when it hurts, then he beats himself up for even feeling hurt, because I should know better. And I'm like, why don't you just be hurt? Like, geez, man, when someone says horrible things to you, it kind of sucks. When was the last, I don't remember that ever feeling good to me personally. So why don't you just be okay with feeling the hurt and understanding it? And maybe you learn something about yourself that maybe perhaps makes you a little more resilient to it in the future. Maybe not, but that way, at least if there's anything else, you free yourself from at least beating yourself up about feeling a normal human emotion.
That's super powerful, because we think that, like, okay, so I understand the situation and I'm going to come in with this system of how I'm going to handle or manage it, but we are people, and allowing ourselves to go through the experience, because his growing is their partnership is, I think everything's intentional. I don't really believe in coincidence. So, their partnership is helping their soul's evolution grow. So by him denying that and just letting it be, water off the duck's back, isn't helping him grow. So how amazing for him to have those words.
Yeah, I agree. And I was saying I believe the same thing. And I think, you surround yourself in agreement, right? Somehow, some way. It might seem like and sometimes when I say that to people, it's like, there's no way I'm doing that. I think you might be, when you feel unworthy, it's funny how you surround yourself with people that think make you feel unworthy or validate your unworthiness, for example. And that's just one tiny example, right? But we definitely surround ourselves in agreement.
Well, and I call that the flick. We all need to be able to flick each other a little bit. And I'm not saying like be a big dick and walk in and be awful all the time. Do it with kindness and compassion, but we need to be able to speak the truth and say, like, I really think you need to look at your actions right now, or I really need to think you need to step back and gain perspective, or whatever it is that you do. That initial feeling we have, that discomfort of being told that our actions are weird or wrong, is important. And we don't do it because we're all trying to be politically correct and not hurt each other and walk around on eggshells for each other. And that is not living.
You're right. And that was one of the ways I think that my wife, the most powerful ways that she contributed to me seeing that I needed to stop drinking. So it was my daughter, calling me out. That was the actual moment that I stopped drinking. But there was my wife contributed to a big way into getting me to the point where I could receive my daughter's words and do something with them. And that's what she would say was, it was like compassionate persistence, right? I mean, instead of saying, you're an asshole, you need to stop drinking. It was, I can see how much more you are capable of, and it really hurts me to know that you're willing to let that go to waste. Or think of how many people you could help if you weren't think of how many people who have gone through something similar to what you've gone through that you could help if you weren't drunk right now, and it's kind of hard to deny those. And there was a moment actually where I was sitting in her office and she was saying that to me, and it was like an out of body experience is probably a little bit of a stretch, but it was like, I could hear my voice like almost from outside my body. And I could hear her saying these words to me, and I could hear me rationalizing why drinking was okay. And I remember thinking, you sound like a crazy person. That was one of those key moments, leading up to, it still wasn't enough to stop me drinking at the time, but it was like this real sense of clarity that what is happening to you, right? Or what has happened to you, or what are you allowing to happen to you?
Well, it's like, so my whole past has been codependency, severe codependency, and letting go of the things. And I watch people cling to the things that are making them sick, just cling to them and not let go because they're afraid of how they're going to feel. And I almost feel like the fear of the feeling is worse than the feeling itself. So preparing ourselves and getting ourselves, so like you imagining, and I'm just projecting here for you, but like I imagine thinking of like what it was going to be or how it was going to be if you didn't drink, or maybe you didn't have that recognition.
Oh yeah, I know. Sure.
Yeah. And like how hard how am I going to do this? How am I going to go through the detox of it or go through whatever? It's going to be so horrible, but like they're not able to look at the pain that they're sitting in currently and how dysfunctional and uncomfortable it has to be.
Oh God, that is so true. And I think the other thing too, like one of the things that was a real roadblock, a self-imposed roadblock for me, was that if I admit this is a problem, my wife is going to know what a fucking liar I am, even though she could clearly see it, right? Like this is what's so weird about it. It's like, I'm like, because I have said so many times, like hundreds of times, I got this under control, man. There's nothing to worry about here. And if I finally say I need help, she's going to know I was lying all those times. But like I said, even though she already knew it. And when I finally let that go, I finally realized that her hand was extended to me the whole time. And I just couldn't see it, or I just wouldn't see it. And as a reasonably intelligent, somewhat logical adult, it's really amazing to understand the power of fear and the power of rationalizations and the power of living in the past. And I feel like, man, if that happened to me, it created so much more compassion in me to understand how easy that is to happen to anybody else. So when I look at people now, I'm like, man, I get it. Like, and I get that it doesn't make sense and that it's friggin' seems impossible and that you're beating the shit out of yourself and that people tell us all the time, like, oh, you should have the power of choice. And, I don't know, man, I'm not so sure. Like, I'm not so sure that when you're really hurting badly, how much power of choice you have. Like ultimately you're still responsible for your own life, but when you're deeply hurting like that, it's a hell of a lot harder to make the right, the choices that will change your life than it is if you're, just in a peaceful, happy place. It's really friggin' hard.
It is really friggin' hard. And I always say, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And then it's like, so, the power to make that choice, like you don't understand what it's going to look like and you don't have the feeling of how it's going to feel afterward. And it's like, so we don't have the ability to sometimes choose what's best for ourselves. And we so much cling to, or we're trying to deal with these deep feelings inside so much that it's almost like you would save somebody that was trying to help you from drowning. Like you're going to push, like you're clinging to it so much. And it's like, until you can have the perspective to be able to see, but that takes action and that ability to walk through.
You're right. And, I think that was one of the things I struggled with so badly was that everything to me was a matter of willpower. It was how I kind of led my life, like I worked out all the time. I was a pretty disciplined eater and all these things. And I really saw that the people that could exhibit the most self-control and self-discipline over themselves were the people that succeeded in the world that I thought I wanted to live in. So, but I couldn't stop this one thing. I just could not stop it. And so I beat the hell out of myself about that. Like what is defective about me in this particular thing, about this particular thing that is preventing me from stopping? I mean, I had many moments where I thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm done trying. This is just how I need to live. Right. And it really, all it was really ever about was admitting or allowing myself to understand how badly I was hurting. That's really what it was.
Is it willpower or is it surrender?
It's surrender.
It's surrender. It's all surrender. And everyone thinks, no, if you just have strong willpower and you just do these things and you just white knuckle it and you don't deal with it and you create these patterns. And I see a lot of a lot of people I know in a lot of communities that we're in, like, you have to have like this fierceness. And I'm like, where's the surrender in you? Like, when are you surrendering to life and its organic flow? And like, what happens then? How do things open up for us? I mean, the moment I decided to throw my drugs away and go home to my family, the doors that opened for me, the people that came into my life, the coaches that came in, like, I have had the most influential, amazing people just come to me and like, how can I support you? How can I support you? And, you know, it came into One Life Fully Lived and got to work with them for a long time. And all of these amazing things happened because I let go of clinging to the pain. And I had no idea what it was going to look like. I just went, and I was kind of surrendering to the situation and letting it guide me, rather than, if I had planned it out in my brain of like how I was going to do it, it probably wouldn't have been so successful for me.
Oh, you know, that is so true. And I see what people, and I kind of went down a similar, well, the path I went down was one of, okay, holy God, I stopped drinking. I actually finally understand that I'm capable of anything. Like, and then what happened was I didn't act. So that was like, I was on cloud nine. Holy God. I can actually remember outside our house skipping down the sidewalk with my wife.
It's called the pink cloud, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that only lasts so long, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like, I am capable of anything. And then like 5 months later, I'm like, okay, I keep telling myself I'm capable of anything, but fuck, I'm doing everything the same except for not drinking. Like, so then I start to worry, am I actually at like the limit of my capabilities here? Was I already at the limit of my capabilities? Now I just can't drink? Is that what happened here? And then I went down this path of like total personal development, like, wow. Yeah. Like, cause I don't do anything in moderation. So I was like, I'm going to consume all this stuff. I discovered Hal Elrod's podcast, Smart Passive Income, like, give it to me all. Like, I'm like a sponge. And then it was like, basically, I think I might be a loser because I can't act on any of this stuff. You know, I've like totally overwhelmed myself with all this personal development, and I see some positive changes, but I don't know what to do from here. And ultimately, all it ever really came down to was allowing myself to become an integrated human being, like allowing myself to just grow into being comfortable being myself in every situation, right? So as I allowed myself to be more, like, for example, I used to call myself an alpha male, and I'm like, I'm not. I can be intense sometimes, but for example, I used to tell myself part of that persona was loving conflict. I hate conflict. I can't stand it. But I also realized as I allowed myself to bring a different, more real version of myself to work, I started just naturally de-escalating conflict. All of a sudden, you know how you surround yourself in agreement? I didn't have any conflict. There was none. Like all these, and so as I just started to like let go of some of the 5 tips for this and 7 steps for that, I think I'm just going to start being myself and just see what happens here. And boy, it's funny when you do that, magic just starts to appear.
Well, and I think Lao Tzu talks about it in the Tao Te Ching, if you've read it, but it like talks about like always trying to be in manifestation and always trying to create. We completely miss out on mystery. We completely miss out on like the magicalness of it all. And I know like my own journey, this whole personal development, I got to know why was my life this way? Like what caused that in me? Well, I got my answers. I'm sitting in Peru. I come out of an ayahuasca ceremony and like I was shown exactly why, and nothing changed. I had all the answers I'd been seeking and nothing was different. And then I was like, oh my God, I was like, now what? Because now I know and I have the understanding, but my life is still this and I still am here, and it's still being very much in knowing each day that I'm enough. And this whole striving, I do believe in growth, and I think that growth is continual through our life. But what just happened if you like were okay or accepted or loved or adored yourself today just as you are, without this need to constantly having to improve and know and make more money? And like, what if you just went out and sat under a tree and had lunch with yourself and like that was enough?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. You know, I remember I was at a, like, yeah, and I mean, this again is something that I will be, it's part of my journey from now on. I remember being my wife and I were at the cottage and we were going to go canoeing. No, I don't like canoeing at all. In fact, there's a canoe and there's a motorboat beside each other on the dock. And I'm like, my way of thinking is who in their right mind would choose the canoe when there's a motorboat right there? But regardless, my wife loves canoeing. So we went canoeing and, it's beautiful. The sun is coming up and nature's all around us and it's peaceful and quiet. And my mind was everywhere except for the canoe. And, except for in this moment of things I have to do and, blah, blah, blah. And I really had this really, and I've had this before, but I had this really powerful realization that my journey forward is looking inward. Like it really is. And there's so much there that I don't understand. And I want to, and I want to be able to be fully present. And it's, sometimes I have those moments and sometimes I don't, but I know that is where I need to explore for the next, however long it takes. And I just feel like if I do that, the opportunities I create, they'll all take care of themselves. I don't know how, it doesn't matter. It's the mystery, right? I have no idea.
No, we have no idea. And like what we think it's going to look like, it never comes out that way. I have this belief, it's like being in all this personal development and all these groups and masterminds and communities and stuff. And finally, I felt like I had sat down at this table of knowledge and I picked up this really big wooden spoon and I was just shoveling the information, shoveling it in. And finally I was full. And I pushed myself back from the table and I'm like, what do I know? Because we already know, like everything's already within us. It's just reconnecting with it. And I do a lot of work with Philip Shepherd, and he's someone that you should definitely check out because he teaches us embodiment, how to really get within ourselves and connect. And it's such beautiful work. And it's really about what do you have to share with us that's yours rather than regurgitating everyone else's information. Because that's all we do is everything's like a regurgitation of Tony Robbins or some form of that. And it's like, okay, but what do you have to share? And like, what is your truth? Because your truth isn't my truth. You only have your perspective and your experience. Going back to your canoe story, I have a metaphor, or I believe that if you're dating someone or you're going to date someone or you're looking at marrying someone, you should ride in a canoe together because it's such a complete understanding of how your relationship's going to work. So before I got married, I went on this canoe trip with my soon-to-be husband, and we were in this river in Florida, and there was little alligators in the water and all of this stuff. And we dumped the canoe, and we did not work well together. And I wanted to steer when I needed him to steer, and that was always the metaphor. I was always having to steer, and he wouldn't steer. And we dumped it, and it was a shitty day. And if you pay attention to what that canoe ride's like, it probably will explain the relationship very well. So that's a very interesting idea. Yeah, because it's pretty essential, right? There's not a lot of, I think that's a great point. So my wife just steers. And that's when we canoe, and that's a great metaphor for our relationship. It is. Yeah. And like understanding how you want that to be, because, for me, like I've always envisioned two people standing at the base of a mountain, and that they're both going to get to the top. And they'll both get each other. They'll both get themselves there. And it's like every time I was in a relationship, I would show up at the bottom of the mountain, and there was a man that would show up with a wagon, and he was wanting me to pull him up the hill. And I did pull him up the hill every single time. It wasn't that joint. So looking at those pieces. So we're in this we're going to shift gears here a little bit. We're in this beautiful new time of this new paradigm of love, conscious relationship, equality. We're kind of breaking out of the king and queen thing, thank God, and really looking at each other as equals and, conscious growth and conscious intimacy and tantra and all of these pieces. How do you and your wife have a successful conscious relationship during these times? Like, what are some of your key ingredients?
Ooh, that's a great question. So one of the things we do is we do this thing called, so she's really big, and I will give her a ton of credit. Her name's Tanya, a ton of credit for always remembering to bring intention into our relationship. So one of the things we do is we start most mornings. We don't do it every morning, but we start most mornings with it was called a rings chat. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's you each say, how am I really feeling? What are my intentions for the day? What do I need from you? What am I grateful for? And then someday I would like to, whatever, but we're not both big on like being like our feelings so much in the sense that, so we changed it to wings, which is the W stands for who would I like to be today?
Oh, nice.
And so we have a 5-10 minute conversation, probably usually 5 minutes about that in the morning. And it really helps, I think, set the tone for the day because we're clear on what we need from each other. It just feels good. I think not even so much the outcome sometimes, but I think the act of bringing intention just feels good. Like regardless of whatever the method you're using to bring it. So, I mean, that's something we do. We just had, yesterday we had a family board meeting or whatever. So we all got the kids together and we spent probably 3.5 hours actually sitting down talking about what do we want our family to be? How do we want to feel in our home? What makes us want to come home? How do we want our friends to feel in our home? And it was funny. The kids, 13 and 12-year-olds, it's a hard thing to get them to think in abstract terms. So they're like, what do you mean? What is the purpose of our family? I just tell me the rules. That's really all I want to know. Anyway, but we made them go through it and it was, but it turned out to be really great. And we got some really good insights. And so I think that's something we try to do. We really talk a lot about how to hold space for one another, for example. And I think we call each other on our shit. Like she's pretty good at that. She's really good at that, actually. So yeah, I mean, it's just a series of, I think actually what it is a fundamental belief that creating the relationship we want it is a proactive set of activities, right? It's got to be worked on. We have the opportunity to work on it and we're committed to working on it. And there's times where it's wonderful. There's times where it's challenging. And not to run from any of it, so for example, we had a situation where the last week, so she was feeling very, what's the best way to put it? Like she didn't want to be touched. Like she was just, leave the fuck alone, basically. And I had, for some reason, this really hard time accepting it. I think because my feelings were hurt, actually, is I think what it was. And so basically what I did was I got into her space and she really recoiled from that. She got really quite upset about it, right? Because I didn't respect her boundaries. And I wasn't trying to be I wasn't trying to be a predator about it or anything, but it really created we had some heated conversation about it, but then we had some really wonderful conversation about it. And it really caused me to think about how things are different a woman in today's society. So for example, as a man, I walk around anywhere I want, any time of day I want, without ever any worry about anything, and it really made me stop and think about that. And so she was quite upset because she kind of felt like I brought some of that into our home in a way where I didn't respect her boundaries. And I've been talking to a lot of the women I know about this, and it's like, holy God, I didn't know. I mean, it was just been so enlightening for me to understand how different the experience is, just generally speaking, for men and women, right? And so that was kind of a heated conversation, but it really led to a much deeper understanding of what she needs. And I don't know, it ended up being great, but so I don't know.
And it is such a different experience. I mean, there's times when I won't wear certain things because I know I'm going to be in certain areas, or I'm going to walk a certain distance, or I won't do a ponytail, or I won't do whatever, just for my own safety. Because there's lots of times I'm in situations and I'm like, is this safe? Who, and then I kind of look around, who in this environment could help me if I needed help, because I don't know personal, I can't do self-defense, and I really need to work on those things. But it's it is a different experience as we walk through the world, because we can so easily be taken over or overpowered. Mm-hmm. So it is a completely different experience, but interesting to have that dynamic be in the home where she just didn't feel like being touched. And we have so much happening with the eclipse and stuff. I know so many people that are going through, I needed to have some separation from my spouse for a couple of weeks. So I went away, or I went whatever, just because everything's so intense right now. So learning those boundaries and learning how different the experience is. In your podcast, we were talking about how, it's different body image for women and body image for men, and the perceived notion we have, and trying to understand each other's. I mean, for the most part, you guys have an easier time. It's not always, but an easier time in fitness and having results, and where our bodies hold fat in different places and different things, because we're women, and really respecting the body and listening to the body so that we can celebrate our bodies.
Yes. And, on that note, one of the things that my wife does that I think is so great is she is really into female empowerment. And so one of the things, for example, is she is absolutely adamant, for example, about not taking a pill, because she is so in tune with her cycle
Yeah.
And she's teaching our daughters who are just entering that time in their life about the importance of knowing your body. And so there's times where, like, you know, there's like 4 days out of the month where it's always funny. I say, when I come home and my wife's got her sneakers on, I'm in deep shit. It's hurricane go time, right? And then there's other times when she's more inward looking, and you know, it's really amazing. So that she has that insight, that she's helped me have that insight into her, and that she's teaching our daughters that this is not something that you need to manipulate with a fucking chemical. It's a natural part of being a woman. There's easy ways to be, you know, quote, safe, but learn it, embrace it, and use it, right? Because it's a part of your natural womanhood, and it's something to be celebrated.
Oh, it's so something to be celebrated. And when you look at every single person that's on this planet, it came through a woman.
Yeah.
Like the power of that, and the power of bleeding, and the power of all of these places, and not having it be this stigma of this time, or, you know, in like a lot of cultures, the women go away together so that they can be in this space together and just be in what they need to be. I agree about the pill. It's such a hormonal change, and to see the physical side effects of what happens to people when I believe, and I could be wrong, I've never tested the theory in the sense of, but like, I believe when you're so in tune with your body and you are clear about when you ovulate, when these times come, that you can be very conscious with conception.
Right.
Yeah. Very. And I have a woman who does a podcast. She did an episode with me about free birth, but like being in tune with our body, it's irresponsible to just not know when this is happening and to think that you need to rely on something. Like, you're not in connection with self. You're living outwardly. You're not living inwardly. And that's my judgment, but I'm holding on to that one.
well, if you look at my experience, you know, my experience, like my education around sex was, okay, you're 8 years old. I'm going to read you this book. Where do babies come from? So being an 8-year-old boy, having your mom read this book when she had never broached the subject at any other time ever. So we laugh, me and my little brother, of course we laugh about it. Oh, picture of a vagina. Yeah. So my mom goes, okay, I'm going to read this to you one more time. And if you laugh again, I'm not reading it again. So of course we laugh again. That's it. Close the book. Done. You're on your own, basically, right? And I think, wow, I look at what my kids are getting from both of us. It's so empowering. I'm just so optimistic about, you know, I mean, I love how free ranging this conversation is. But one thing I think is super interesting is that I am, as a dad, what I find really interesting about my perception about my daughters is that I am really into the idea of them becoming empowered sexual beings. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't scare me in the slightest.
Yes.
You know, I just think it's something to be celebrated, you know, and yeah, so we're having these, now that my daughter's in grade 9, we're really having a lot of different conversations, because we sent them to a private school. It was, you know, a Waldorf school. It was pretty, just a very different teaching philosophy, but it was a much smaller school. And now she's in a public school that's much bigger, and it's a whole, like, it is crazy how different it is, right? But it's providing the opportunity for so much great conversation. And I just feel like what I want her to know is I want her to feel ownership over her body, ownership over what feels comfortable for her, you know, and to have the courage and the conviction to stand up for what's comfortable for her in the face of whether it's peer pressure from other girls or maybe pressure for some kind of boy that wants to be her boyfriend. But if she's making those choices that are aligned with what feels good to her, I'm pretty open, man. Like, just make the choices that feel good for you. We'll always, like, let's keep talking about those choices, you know, and I think I think they'll both grow into much more empowered young women. Completely.
You know, and I'm learning a lot about Tantra right now. Very empowering to understand our energies, like where women like to be touched from the inside out and men like to be touched, from the outside in, and men like to be touched from the inside out. And understanding how that energy within ourselves, and teaching our young women this at a very young age, to respect and love their bodies and to understand how they work, you know, before we introduce them into crazy relationships and having it be like taboo to be sexual. We're sexual creatures. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to happen. So teaching them to have really good boundaries and like what's important for them, and what that looks like for them. Because otherwise we're just generations of people having children too young because there's no education, and it's not taught in schools, and it's not taught, in all of these ways. And we are the ones that have to share this knowledge and bring it out to our young people because they're the future, right?
Yeah. And the teaching of the mechanics of it, is such a tiny sliver of what it's actually all about.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's about who are you and how do you express what you want and how do you know what feels right and all of these things. And how do you know what feels right and do what feels right if it's not in alignment with what somebody else feels is right. And we're very clear with them about it's not what we think is right. That is not it. It is what you think is right. We will, and I think for dads, that's one of the things I talk about all the time about vulnerability is that, like, my job as parent, our job as parents is to teach our kids the power their choices have to create the future they want. And I can use my vulnerability to give them more information from my own life to help them make more informed choices. So, like, for example, even though I had a huge drinking problem, I'm never, ever going to tell my kids not to drink. But what I will do is I will just be completely open with them about what happened to me. Like, why I drank. I took my first drink at 13 because I fucking wanted to fit in so bad. And I didn't have sort of the self-identity and the courage to just march to the beat of my own drummer. And then, yeah, you know what? When I was drinking as a teenager, there were some fun times. Like, man, it was, like we had some hilarious, awesome times. But then, why I drank when their mom was sick and what that created for me. And then what my life has been like afterwards. And none of it with any judgment, or it's just, here's what happened to me, and take that information. And if you can use that to help you make more informed choices, ultimately that's what I want. But the choices are yours to make. And, they have consequences, obviously.
Of course, every decision has maintenance and consequences. Yeah,
but I think that's, to me, what will give them the freedom and the information to grow into the people they were meant to be, right? So,
I remember someone very close to me in my family once saying about addiction and stuff I had done when I was younger. She's like, what are you going to tell your children one day? And I didn't have an answer then because I was very young. And now my answer would be the truth, because that's what I needed for my soul to evolve and continue on, and for me to be able to do this work. So, it is allowing the space for mistake. And I love your belief on right, because who actually decides what's right and wrong, what's left and right, what's black or white? And I don't believe in living in that area. I think it is gray. It's gray for everyone. It's everyone's right to choose what is right for them.
Yeah. And, I also think right and wrong and a positive, negative, those are all judgments, right? Like when I talk to people, to me, it's about creating something different, right? And if that different thing that you create with your choice doesn't really feel good, well, you can create something different again. But if there's a positive, then there's, like, by, logical extension, there needs to be a negative. And when things don't, you try to do something positive and it turns out to be a negative, what does that say about you as a human being? And I don't know, I'm really becoming, it's something I'm actually talking about a lot more lately, is just the power of the language we use, both inside our heads and out, and when we talk to other people, because it's really becoming clear to me how powerful it is in shaping the way we look at the world.
Oh, of course it is. Polarity. I mean, this is off topic, but like to see what's happening with the NFL right now is just so profound, and having all these people say it should be this way and it should be that way. And I'm like, rather than just sitting down and having conversation or having whatever, we're so based in this polarity of either one way or the other. And it's.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I had this guest on the podcast the other day, and it was so interesting because this person would be what you consider like a social justice warrior kind of person. And we were talking about racism. And I thought the podcast was going to be about mental health and racism. But it really turned into this was actually the first time I've ever talked to somebody who had this perspective. And it was like, I can't believe how wildly divergent our worldviews are. But I think what was amazing about it was that there were polarity in our points of view, but there was a unity in our openness to our willingness to be open to talk about it. Right. And I thought, like, I texted him the other day and I'm like, I seriously thought about our conversation for like 3 days afterwards, cause I think that's what's really important, is to understand that just what you said, my point of view is not right. I don't even think right is a concept that really has much to do with my point of view. It's just an interesting point of view, just like his point of view was an interesting point of view. And if we look at it that way, it makes us much more open to receiving the wisdom and the insights that other people have to share.
Well, cognitive dissonance is so interesting to me. I could probably spend like a lifetime studying how it works with people. But I find, like, to break somebody out of that space, like, I don't need to agree with you and you don't need to agree with me. Like, let's just share. And I'll say, just consider it for a second. Just consider it to be possible for just a second. And you can literally see like a click, like something click within them. And it's like, oh, okay, so interesting. And if I'm planting a seed, and I'm not planting a seed for them to see, for me to be right, I'm planting a seed for them just to say, have different perspective, because I can see where it all has value. I believe that source is here experiencing itself through all of us for all different kinds of experience, good and bad. And love is all. Love is tragedy and horror and love and intimacy and it's all of it. It's all encompassing. And when we can really embrace that, I think it can create a shift so that we can all sit down and just consciously have some conversation with each other and hear each other.
Oh man, I have this conversation with my dad all the time, but he's like, oh, your mother this, your mother that. And she does the same thing. And I'm like, is it possible that what you both believe is equally as true to each of you? Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to accept that, what might that create? Would that create an opportunity to maybe understand this person you've been with for like 50 fucking years? Do you have any interest in doing that? Or is it really that, so what I say to him now is like, oh, your mother this, your mother that. And I'm like, I'm only talking to you from now on about things that you would be open to considering maybe changing about yourself, right? Because obviously you can't change mom, like, because you've been trying that. Or at least your approach isn't working. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to talk about you, and maybe, that doesn't go too far, but, it makes me feel better. Cause I don't like being in that dynamic, but you're right. And that can be, I think for me, I struggle with this. The person I struggle with this the most in is my wife. And I think it's because she is closer to me than any other person. And there's pretty much no one else who could say something that would hurt my feelings, I think, but she can. And even if she's not trying to, I can be very sensitive. I'm a very sensitive person, actually. And so sometimes but what I'm noticing myself doing now is much more consciously catching myself when I find myself going to the path to the spot of feeling defensive. Like, where before I would get defensive and then I would, do the man pout for a while and then come back and then realize, well, there's probably something here to talk about. It's almost in the moment now where I can do that. So I feel good about that. But yeah, it's there's so many interesting, like, infinite dynamics in all of our relationships and all of our histories and all of our interactions, and all those things create this crazy, space where, I don't know, sometimes it's interesting to try to figure out how to best handle it.
I used to feel, that's a very good point. I used to feel like I was like going through times and stages where I was really doing the work, and then I would have this like plateau or this reprieve, and then I would go back into it. And now I feel like it's like living work. Like it's every single minute of every single day being very aware, very self-aware, very self-responsible. And it's just this constant dynamic of being in creation, co-creation with the universe, co-creation with self, co-creation with all the people in our lives, the whole piece.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's, when you look at it that way, there's so much freedom in it, right? Because there is no right path. There's just, I want to be open to creating whatever opportunities I create with whoever I happen to come across. And I know that being my, authentic integrated self is a wonderful way to be able to, meet people where we can create together, and that being present is a wonderful way for me to see like a different set of opportunities. And it's all this ongoing thing. And one of the things I always tell people is that, self-compassion, God, that goes a long way. And understanding that, yeah, man, it's fucking messy sometimes, and that's okay. That is just part of the journey. And if you can just be okay with that, and even showing people that, that it can be messy sometimes, it gives them the freedom to understand and maybe believe or embrace, or at least gives them an example of somebody who's, able to embrace the suck sometimes and still be quote, okay.
If it isn't messy, you aren't trying.
Yeah, right. I know. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's funny because, I mean, I see myself, even with the language thing. I mean, I just, not yesterday morning, but the other morning, I said to my wife something about trying to be an entrepreneur. And she goes, you are an entrepreneur, and I'm like, God, even I coach people on this stuff, and it's still, there's always an opportunity, you need to be just conscious and aware and have people in your corner that care about you and call you on your shit. And yeah, it's just, life is so different than what I thought it was for so long. And there's so much more to it, like I never would have imagined, like, for example, I was telling the guys in the mental health warrior group, like, I'm totally going to Peru, man. Like, I'm fucking doing ayahuasca because that shit is
I'll hook you up with
places. Yeah. Like that is calling to me because I know, like, for example, one of the things I'm becoming more aware of, and I to a certain extent, I have some fairly clear awareness, like, but how I had a good childhood. Like, I don't have anything to complain about, but how it contributed to the person I am today. Like, I don't feel like I understand that enough. I feel like there's an opportunity for me to go way deeper there. And so how I do that, I'm not sure. I maybe it's ayahuasca. Maybe it is, going through this, like, I have a friend that does these biography workshops. I don't know, but I feel like the more I understand it, just the more, you know what? I don't even know what. I just feel like it's important right now that I understand it more, and whatever comes out of that, fuck, I have no idea.
Well, when you understand that the plant spirit of ayahuasca, grandmother, when she shows up, like, there's an intelligence there that's billions of years past anything we could even comprehend. And like what she can show you. I mean, I remember going into one ceremony and I had like 20 things I was like trying to have clarity on, and she showed them to me in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had like 5 hours left. I'm like, What is she going to show me? And like, we cleared thousands of years of stuff in my lineage and showing me like the patterns of like not embracing women. It was a burden in my family to be a woman. Like, women in my family don't breastfeed or haven't breastfed. So all of these little interesting pieces of like where it broke down and clearing and cleaning, like what we're able to see, like the perspective we can gain, then go back and integrate it into our lives. And it's not like you get the answer necessarily, you get perspective.
Interesting.
A much deeper perspective to be able to see things differently. And for me, that's been the experience. For everybody, it's different. It just really depends where you are in your journey and what you're asking for and what you're looking for. But it's funny, she'll show you what you want to know, and then she'll show you what she wants you to know.
That's, as you were talking there, the image that came to my mind was, instead of treading water on the surface of life, I just pictured, while you were talking, allowing myself to sink into it.
Completely.
And that's what I've been doing. And I still feel like I'm totally in the shallow end, and I'm looking, but that's really what it was. Just this mad, never ending exertion of energy trying to stay afloat, when really maybe it was never really about that at all.
No. And like this, so plant medicine, this whole path is all about just one word: surrender and allow and experience. And I know for me, like, especially with depression and especially the anxiety I had about the whole thing, like I remember the first time she took me in to sit in my depression, man, it was like a black fucking hole for me. And it was so intense. And she was like, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to get out. And she's like, you need to just sit here. Like I hadn't surrendered into it. And as soon as I finally surrendered into it, like I had this magical unicorn come and whisk me away. And it was like this amazing experience, but it was allowing me to feel the depths of what is potentially there for me. And I know that for depression specifically, like the research that they're doing is just profound to help people really understand the processing of what we're capable of feeling. So whatever you're looking for, and my whole show is like basically about plant medicine in some way, shape or form all the time. It is, if you decide, it is a journey that is profound.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. I can actually, in some way, I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's calling to me. Like, I know I just have this weird knowing that it's important for me to do.
Well, and then when you do it and you realize, oh my gosh, this is so familiar. I've done this so many times before. I remember her showing me dreams I remember having as a child. about ayahuasca. I didn't know the connection at the time, and it was like, she's been showing me this my whole life. It had been somewhere. And like, once you do the medicine, you can connect into it anytime. So yeah, it will be interesting. If you do go, I would love to have you on a show just to talk about your experience.
Oh man, totally. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Well, so if you have like a message or something that you want people to know or something you want people to walk away with from our show today, what would it be?
I think one thing I say to people, and I think it's really important, is that we are all super powerful in the sense of in terms of the contribution we can make to other people. And I think one of the things that each of us can do to show people, an individual action we can take, I guess, is to look somebody in the eye. And if you feel like they might be struggling with something, just say that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I won't judge you. There's so much, we try to make things so much bigger. We try to think of, mental health months and awareness programs and blah, 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 all these things. And it's really just boils down to letting people know with those simple words that I'm safe and I care and I will listen, and when you embrace your ability to do that, you understand how much power just that simple gesture has. You develop a much deeper understanding of how much power you have to make a significant contribution in the world.
I completely agree. And that is such profound words. I have struggled too. That is a beautiful way. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for the person you are and the work that you're doing in your own life and the journey, and for being organic and allowing, and for showing other men what's possible with vulnerability. We need more men like you on the planet. Oh,
thanks so much. You know what? I think I've done a lot of podcasts, and this was without a doubt my favorite one. I loved how it flowed. I loved the topic. I loved talking to you, and so glad we crossed paths.
I have too. I'm excited to see what co-creation will come from us.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Cosmic family. It's Rhonda here. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Cosmicsmith Radio. If you're interested in finding out more about one-on-one coaching with me, or you're interested in attending one of our private plant medicine retreats, please go to cosmicsmith.com and go to our contact page and leave us your information along with a message. We will get back to you promptly. It's time for you to walk your path of truth. It's time for you to be a Cosmic Smith.